Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are in Parashat Ki Tavo this morning, which means that we are going to be looking, since we're in the third of every parsha, because we're in the third year of a triennial reading, it means we're going to be starting at chapter 27, verse 11. But I would like, before we read the text, sometimes we read the text, then we contextualize. I would like to contextualize before we read the text this morning. What we're going to be looking at is a series of blessings and curses that are delivered by Moshe to the people. Remember, they're getting ready to cross. Moshe is not going with them. So this is one of Moshe's last jobs as their leader, is to impart to them the importance of keeping the covenant. And as early as the 3rd millennium BCE in Sumer, we have examples of these texts. So 3rd millennium BCE, Sumer. Right? So we have Sumerian versions of this 3000 BCE. All right. So think about that for a minute, right? That is a very, very, very old tradition. And Israel is not even close to any kind of real reconstruction, bless you, or any kind of newness about this. This is very much an old practice. It is very much ingrained in the culture of the ancient Near East, that when you have a covenant, you enforce it by speaking what will happen if you keep it and what will happen if you break it. It makes a lot of sense if you think about why you're doing it. It makes a lot of sense that the punishments for breaking it would be really what's focused on, right? Yes, it's nice to have rewards and all of that, and that's a good thing. But really the point of this ceremony is a motivation to keep people from breaking the covenant. These were rituals that were done. We also see parallels as far away as Greece of this kind of a ritual. So it was in the neighborhood, but it was in the big neighborhood, right, of the ancient Near East. And what do we know before Israel? What do we know about covenants?
Maybe between the king and the people.
Which king?
The ruling king.
The conquering king makes a covenant with the conquered king and the people. These ceremonies were all about that relationship. So when there's a covenant that's cut between a conquering king and a vassal king or a vassal people, these ceremonies would have been a public, very awesome ceremony to really drive home the consequences of not keeping the agreement.
They had no paper and they had no internet.
Right?
So, I mean, this was the way it was communicated and shared. People didn't read.
Correct.
In general.
Correct. So what you did was, if people don't read, and even if they read, you can't hand out clay copies to everybody to keep in their home, right? It's a heavy business, like handing out clay tablets to everybody. What you do is you write it in public and you recite it in public. So you would go over the terms of the agreement, and then you would have this ceremony where, in front of everybody, the blessings for following the covenant and the curses for the consequences for not keeping it are read out loud. Usually you're going to involve your religious authorities. This is going to have religious overtone, a religious basis as a ceremony. So now you're bringing in the gods essentially to witness. So the gods witness that the people have said, Amen. The blessings are recited, the curses are recited, and the people answer Amen. Why do the people need to answer Amen?
They're agreeing to it.
So they're verbally committing themselves the same way we, right? When we are in court, we swear, right? They are basically saying, we promise to do this. And not only do we promise to do this, but we accept and help trigger the mechanisms by which we will be cursed if we don't and blessed if we do. So amen is more than just I agree, right? Amen is make it so, number one, right? So it's
total belief.
It's total acceptance of the terms of the covenant and a participation in unleashing the realities that will flow from either keeping the covenant or breaking it.
The way is an enforcement.
It was seen as the way to enforce the covenant, because a lot of the ways the covenant will be broken will be in private. So we're going to look at the first 5 terrible things, and they're all things that happen in private, right? Because there's no way to enforce that unless you are dealing and bringing into the picture forces that do know that you've done it in private, right? Otherwise you need witnesses and you go to court and then right? So it's a way of invoking those forces that will know what you've done even in private. And the big reconstruction of the early Israelites is that the covenant is cut with God. So God becomes the king. So it used to be that God's witnessed the covenant between the conquering king and the vassal king. The big reconstruction done by early Israel is that God is king. Yes? And the people are entering the covenant with God, God's self.
And presumably, I guess, God would know what went on behind closed doors as well.
100%. And so when the people answer Amen,
They would have to mean it.
They are acknowledging that they are participating in, again, the realities that are created by their behavior, as well as acknowledging that God will be involved in all of this, and God knows everything, right, that we do and don't do. All right.
Or put another way, everything matters, whether other people see it or not.
That's exactly right. Everything matters whether someone sees it or not. And that is part of a new move, is that the king will know what you've done in private and will bring these, consequences to bear, right? That's new. Otherwise, a human king can't know what people are doing in private. So that is a shift with early Israel's reinterpretation of this ritual, having God as king, is that the king will know what's being done in private, right? And this is how early Israel explained a lot of the catastrophe that happened to them, was the king knew and saw what we were doing in private, and we didn't measure up.
So private is just from people.
Private is just from people, and that's a new business in the ancient Near East, a new way of understanding all of this. We believe that many of these hunks of these were taken from older texts. They are too similar to texts that have been found, and some of them are so redundant that if somebody were just writing them, sitting down and writing them, they wouldn't write them the way they're written. So most likely these came, as whole hunks from much earlier texts and are put here together by the Deuteronomist. All right. So let's look at 27:11.
Thereupon Moses charged the people, saying, after you have crossed the Jordan, the following shall stand on Mount Gerizim, when the blessing for the people is spoken. Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. Those are the tribes. Right? When? Rabbi?
Yes.
That's referring to the tribes.
That's referring to the tribes,
Yeah?
correct.
Am I correct? Okay. And for the curse, the following shall stand on Mount Ebal. Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. The Levites shall then proclaim in a loud voice to all the people of Israel, Cursed be anyone who makes a sculptured or molten image abhorred by the Lord, a craftsman's handiwork, and sets it up in secret, and all the people shall respond, Amen. Cursed be he who insults his father or mother, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who moves his fellow countryman's landmark, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who misdirects a blind person on his way, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who subverts the rights of the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, and all the people shall say, Amen.
Go on.
Oh. Cursed be he who lies with his father's wife, he has removed his father's garment, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who lies with any beast, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who lies with his sister, whether daughter of his father or of his mother, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who lies with his mother-in-law, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who strikes down his fellow countrymen in secret, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who accepts a bribe in the case of the murder of an innocent person, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who will not uphold the terms of this teaching and observe them, and all the people shall say, Amen.
All right. So, my commentary from JPS calls this the anathematization of clandestine sin. the words you learn to say and pronounce with no problem as a rabbi. The anathematization of clandestine sin. So 12 sins, 12 clandestine sins are here, 11 specific, 1 all-inclusive. So if we're looking at these being anathema, then that says something about what the priorities of the society are. Right? If these are the big 11, and we get elsewhere that you can't do these, and even they're capital punishment, right, for some of these, but the Deuteronomist is putting these front and center, right? And so what do we know about what Israelite society in this case is concerned about?
Well, I assume they got these ideas from things that people were already doing.
Correct. Correct. So something that people are doing, and that Torah cares a lot, or the Deuteronomist at least, cares a lot about not happening.
A lot about sexual activity.
A lot about sexual activity.
And it's preservation of the culture, too, because all of those things lead to less than desirable new members of the clan.
Well, what's interesting is some of these, one of these at least, was permitted in earlier books of the Bible, right? So you could sleep with the daughter of your father, or if you had different mothers. This prohibits both. So it's interesting that even saying less than desirable is my brain, I'm so sorry. My vocabulary is just not happening this morning.
You can say anathematization.
That I can say. I can't say regular words. So in other words, it changes. Like what is less than desirable as the issue of a union changes, right? It's not like, oh my God, they're going to be developmentally disabled, right? Or genetically impaired. It doesn't seem to be like, oh, well then we clearly can't do that. It's like, so the norms shift and change about what is considered incest and what is not. Incest is the issue. And probably, of course, having issue that are less desirable is part of banning incest. But what defines incest is interesting. It's changed by the time we get to Deuteronomy. Richard?
Isn't those of the five of the 11 prohibitions are related to sexual activity. 4 of them are at least tangentially related to incest. The lying with the mother-in-law isn't, presumably. But isn't the argument that the reason for these rules is because of some dim understanding of the possibility of genetic malformation and things like that? Isn't that almost analogous to making the argument that, well, the reason that the Israelites don't eat pork is because they never learned how to cook it properly, and so they ended up getting sick, and so they decided, okay, well, this doesn't work. So is it that kind of a reason why they're mathematizing these types of
So to your pork question, we know that's not true, right? So we know that's not true. We know they knew how to cook pork. Their neighbors had pork festivals. So it's probably about you can't go to their festival. What's really off limits is their religion, right? It's separation. So to keep you pure in that sense. And so my guess is that is the same thing here. That it is about if you start sleeping with people in the family, it creates, right, a kind of tension and possible abuse and like all kinds of dynamics in the family and destruction that Deuteronomy understands to be wrong. And the mother-in-law business is often about who owns her sexuality, right, and whose toes you'd step on.
Mother-in-law as well as mother-in-law.
That line about the mother-in-law is very much.
How do you account for the fact? I would have expected one of the first things to be prohibited is homosexual behavior following Leviticus, and yet there's no mention of it here. And is there an accounting of that? Why?
So I'll give you my opinion, having studied the issue a bit. It's because it's not a big deal.
God, I mean, you look at Leviticus, it's a big deal.
It's one sentence in Leviticus.
It's a big deal.
A lot of commandments are repeated over and over and over and over. One time it says a man shall not lie with a man as he lies with a woman. So it seems it is not that big a deal.
So it isn't that important.
It isn't that important. It's not here, right? It's not here.
If it's not here, is it not prohibited then?
No, it's prohibited. But we have to ask the question, if you're doing this huge ceremony and we're talking about sexual behavior, either this was much more common sexual behavior, right? Or these are the biggies. These are the ones that Torah's most concerned about. That Torah's not so concerned. We see homosexuality once. It's a big collection of laws that we have once. Love the stranger, we're told 36 times. When Torah wants to make a point about something, it does so, right? We see honor your mother and your father in the Ten Commandments. We don't, right? When it wants to make a point about something being absolutely fundamental and really important, Torah makes that point. And it is not the case that homosexuality is that important.
It's all about keeping the group cohesive and moving.
Yes.
And homosexuality doesn't prohibit it, doesn't stop that movement or cohesive.
Well, and the other thing, to remember is the only reason you know that verse from Leviticus is because it's been used by, and I'm not saying just you. The only reason we know that verse is because it's been picked out. But I could give you several prohibitions from Leviticus that you've never heard of. Well, hopefully if you've been learning with me, you've heard of them. But
would you conclude then that that's the difference between a custom and a serious injunction? Leviticus is saying, among other things, hey, just don't do it, it's not good. Well, this is saying, if you don't do it, you're cursed.
Well, a fundamentalist will read them all with the same weight, right? So people who love to pick out verses read them all with the same weight, right? Except they don't. Right, because take care of the poor. That one that's mentioned like a bunch of times gets excised, and other ones get lifted up. And they say they have the same weight, but they don't because they don't give it the same weight themselves. But it's very clear in Leviticus that it's a capital offense. So you're not. And again, I think it goes back to the pork issue. You're not supposed to be like those other people who are having relationships that are counter to what Torah understands as normative behavior. And there is some evidence that those relationships were, if you think of Greece, ancient Greece, many of them were between elder men and younger boys. And so they are exploitative often. So first of all, it was not the normal way of things for a man to give up his power and become submissive and receive. Just like you can't eat things that live in the water but can crawl up on the land. The Torah likes things right? Creation is about order. It's about pulling things apart and keeping them in their boxes and keeping them in their place. And anything that crosses those boundaries makes Torah very nervous, and it's off limits. It's taboo. And a lot of people believe that is the origin, or there's several ways that
I would add,
lead to that commandment.
there are things like, carrying wood on Shabbat.
That's a capital
Or
offense.
insulting, going back to Leviticus. Or insulting your parents, which I think is a capital offense in Leviticus as well. And the reason we know, reason we know it is some people like to grasp one particular thing and make it the most important thing that ever came out of Torah.
Yes.
I just find that some of the other ones are so fascinating because I don't remember hearing them before in other places, like the
Moving the mark.
The mark, the misdirecting a blind person, and accepting a bribe for this one thing.
Right? So this goes to that point, right? So
all
those things are in Leviticus. They're all there. It says, and you will not put it, you've heard it, you will not place a stumbling block before the blind. Right? But we don't tout that one on signs and carry it through the streets, do we? Right?
That's been interpreted metaphorically as well, that you don't mislead someone who doesn't know something, like giving bad financial advice.
Well, and presumably that is what it means.
Right, as well as leading a blind person in wrong.
Right. Right, but presumably not a lot of people are running around leading blind people down dark alleys and like running them into walls, right? So I think even Torah understands this
The mind
metaphorically.
The marker thing is about preserving territory.
That's right.
And again, that's about society, like the sexual thing, of keeping society operating properly and not in chaos.
Absolutely. So these are the big 11 behaviors, right? People go, really? Bestiality? Right? Bestiality made it in. Homosexuality did not. Right? But in rural areas, raising animals, it was not uncommon. And some ancient law codes permit sexual intercourse with certain animals and prohibits it with others. That's how normative it was, at least the understanding that people do it.
The collection of all of this, though, is more to distinguish the people of Israel as opposed to really curse them. It's just to say, you are different than your surroundings. Is that the way to read this? So
it's definitely to keep them from doing the worst of what's around them, 100%.
Practice around them.
Which is the goal of the covenant, is to make them a holy people, and their behavior should reflect that. The curses are here to make sure that people don't, in private, where they can't be prevented from doing it, they remember, if I do that, right, I said amen publicly, I will trigger the consequences, and the consequences are horrifying. They're supposed to be.
So I can walk out of here saying, this is just a list of bad behavior, and we as Jews should not engage in this, and it is all around us, and we are different than those tribes around us.
I think, yes, we could
walk out of here saying, I'm about to die because I just did the following.
But it goes beyond just distinction from other people.
Right. So, but I think what I hear David asking is, what do we take from it? What we can take from it is we're commanded to be a holy people. And no matter what's going on around us, we are called to an ethical and moral set of behaviors. We could discuss what they are for us today. In a way, I would love to hear from y'all what you think, right? If we were to reenact the ceremony, if you read my piece in the Jewish Journal, my fantasy is to reenact this ceremony a few weeks ago. My fantasy is to reenact this, right? Because we always read this a few weeks before the high holidays, right? We think this might have been an annual ceremony, a recovenanting ceremony. And so all the people are standing there. All of the blessings and curses are called out, right, on the two mountains, and all the people say amen, right? What if we had huge video screens in the Westwood Theater, and, right, we'd say if, and then you put a picture up there, right? No, of course you do. It's my fantasy, Bert. Oh my gosh. So if you support inner city schools and vote for referenda that give more. Here are the faces of the children who might actually be given hope in their lives.
Amen.
Here's whose destiny you would change, right? If you don't become generous, right? Here's a kid dying of malaria because you couldn't spend a few cents on mosquito netting, and we'd have to answer, Amen. Like, what if we really did this?
Let's do it.
And
Why not?
right. I think it's a little late for the production aspect of the ritual right now.
Planning now for next year.
Yeah, right.
There you go.
Rita?
So, why does he have why is it said that half of the tribe shall stand on one side? Were the ones on the cursed side doing this stuff, or how was it divided? And what was the rationale of actually taking some tribes and putting them in the cursed?
So I think the rationale is it's drama, it's theater. You're going to take half the people and put them on this mountain, half the people on this mountain, the Levites in the middle, right? And you're going to make this a huge covenanting ceremony, right? So it's a national covenanting ceremony. The call and response, if you will.
They weren't really the sinners.
No. But when you look at who's where, right? So one theory is the 6 tribes that settled closest to that mountain, right, north, were on one side, but you've got to have a mix because it's not split half and half. And then ones who were settling further south, more towards the other mountain, were on that mountain. Another one is that the tribes that proclaim blessings are descended from the sons of Rachel and 4 of Leah's sons, while those that proclaim curses are descended from the concubines, Bilhah and Zilpah, and Leah's 2 remaining sons, Reuben, the firstborn, who was deposed because of his incest with Bilhah, and Zvulun, Leah's youngest son. So that's a possible division.
As we'll see in the next piece, this is all about choice.
Yes.
This is right. I mean, the bottom line here is it's saying you can stand on one mountain, basically, or the other.
Well, and if
in
you
your
choose
life.
life,
Right.
I mean, we say that prayer every day.
We're about to be right there.
Yep. All right, 28.
Yeah, this section is in the Reconstructionist prayer book instead of the traditional second paragraph. Of the
Correct.
Not exactly this.
Go.
Now, if you obey the Lord your God to observe faithfully all his commandments, which I enjoin upon you this day, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. All these blessings shall come upon you and take effect, if you will but heed the word of the Lord your God. Blessed be you in the city, and blessed be you in the country. Blessed shall be the issue of your womb, the produce of your soil, and the offspring of your cattle, the calving of your herd, and the lambing of your flock. Blessed shall be your blanket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be in your comings, and blessed shall you be in your goings. The Lord will put to rout before you the enemies who attack you. They will march out against you by a single road, but flee from you by many roads. The Lord will ordain blessings for you upon your barns and upon your undertakings. He will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as his holy people, as he swore to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. And all the peoples of the earth shall see that the Lord's name is proclaimed over you, and they shall stand in fear of you. The Lord will give you abounding prosperity in the issue of your womb, the offspring of your cattle, and the purchase of your soil, the produce of your soil, in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to assign to you. The Lord will open for you his bounteous store, the heavens, to provide rain for your land in season, and to bless all your undertakings. You will be creditor to many nations, but debtor to none. The Lord will make you the head, not the tail. You will always be at the top and never at the bottom. If only you obey and faithfully observe the commandments of the Lord your God that I enjoin upon you this day, and do not deviate to the right or to the left from any of the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, and turn to the worship of other gods.
But
we have to do this. But if you do not obey the Lord your God to observe faithfully all his commandments and laws which I enjoin upon you this day, all these curses shall come upon you and take effect. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the country. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall be the issue of your womb and the produce of your soil, the calving of your herd and the lambing of your flock. Cursed shall you be in your comings, and cursed shall you be in your goings. The Lord will loose against you calamity, panic, and frustration in all the enterprises you undertake, so that you shall soon be utterly wiped out because of your evil doing in forsaking me. The Lord will make pestilence cling to you until he has put an end to you in the land that you are entering to possess. The Lord will strike you with consumption, fever, and inflammation, with scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew. They shall hound you until you perish. The skies above your head shall be copper, and the earth under you iron. The Lord will make the rain of your land dust, and sand shall drop on you from the sky until you are wiped out. That's not enough?
A little bit more.
The Lord will put you to rout before your enemies. You shall march out against them by a single road, but flee from them by many roads. And you shall become a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. Your carcasses shall become food for all the birds of the sky and all the beasts of the earth, and none to frighten them off. The Lord will strike you with the Egyptian inflammation, with hemorrhoids, boil scars, and itch, from which you shall never recover.
Okay, that one right there is enough to get me right in line. Right in line.
The Lord will strike you with madness, blindness, and dismay. You shall grope at noon as a blind person gropes in the dark. You shall not prosper in your ventures, but shall be constantly abused and robbed, with none to give you help.
And here's the worst.
If you pay the bride price for a wife, another man shall enjoy her. If you build a house, you shall not live in it. If you plant a vineyard, you shall not harvest it. Your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. Your ass shall be seized in front of you, and it shall not be returned to you. Your flock shall be delivered to your enemies, with none to help you. Your sons and daughters shall be delivered to another people while you look on, and your eyes shall strain for them constantly, but you shall be helpless. A people you do not know shall eat up the produce of your soil and all your gains. You shall be abused and downtrodden continually, until you are driven mad by what your eyes behold. The Lord will afflict you with the knees and thighs, with a severe inflammation from which you shall never recover, from the sole of your foot to the crown of your head.
You get the idea. Dayenu. Right?
It gets worse.
It gets worse. Just let me tell you, it gets worse. It gets worse. No, you don't. So you get, and it's not over, right? Like, so you get the sense of what it was meant to do, right? It was meant to, and when you say amen, right, you're saying, I help enforce this reality, whether I choose blessing or we choose something horrible, right, as the alternative. It was meant to be scary. It was meant actually to be terrifying. Yeah. Because they lived in a world where it really was a possibility that your children would be carried off before your eyes. And that poverty and famine could be so widespread that we get what's the worst one after that, which you eat your children. So it's meant to evoke all of the fears that the people had anyway. Like, we, again, might change it, right? To the things that haunt us at 3 a.m. And believe me, like, as a mother, right, you don't have to go very far to be pretty terrified of the things that can happen to your children.
We see so much of that in today's news.
Which is why we're terrified,
yeah,
right? Because we see it. It's happening. That's exactly right. That's why this was terrifying to them. It happened all the time. War was a constant possibility. It was a reality of the world they lived in, as was slavery, as was diseases that were communicable and they had no way to stop, and famine that killed everybody, right? If there's no food around, you have to go take it from somebody else. This is how we got to Egypt, right? You have to go down and go get it somewhere.
With this, list of horribles, it really, it's different from what we aspire to today in that there really wasn't a choice. Should I keep these commandments or not? With this list of horribles, I'm going to keep the commandments because I, in this setting, really believe that would happen. There's no choice involved in doing the right thing. Whereas now, I think we try to, sort of think of ourselves as, well, I'm going to do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because terrible things will happen if I don't.
So, what are you saying by that?
It's not. It strikes me that the value on doing the right thing because it's good and because it's right and because it's ethical, loving the stranger and honoring your mother and father, you're doing them because otherwise you'll be decimated, not because it's the right thing to do. So I think what it says, it kind of lessens the choice of doing good. It lessens the goodness of your action. You're only doing
so that's what I was trying to get at. It doesn't lessen your choice. Right. What I heard you saying is it's a less noble choice.
Right.
Because I'm really just trying to preserve myself. I'm not trying to be a good person.
Yeah.
So, and here's where we're very different from the biblical world, because the Bible doesn't care. And sometimes I still have that answer. I really don't care if you're giving with a generous heart. Write the check. You can curse me the whole time, as long as you give me that money for the cause that I need it for, right? So is it better to give with an open heart and a generous spirit? Yes. So we're a better person? Yes. Do I ultimately care at the end of the day? No, not when it comes to the cause. I care about you, right? And so I would hope you would learn, I would learn to be generous and open and whatever, because then I become a better person. But if I'm trying to feed hungry children in a disaster zone, I really don't care right now, right? So I think it's partly it's that. Like if you really understand that this is what's going to happen if you break the rules, it's also contributing to the national safety that you refrain from doing something you really want to do. And is that less noble than I as an individual want to do some self-improvement? Right? We have to flip our values. We're so individualistic in America 2016 that it's like, but we should do everything for the noble purpose of becoming a better individual. That was not the point in the time the Torah was written. The point was you were part of a community and your behavior impacted the community. And will you refrain in private from doing something you really want to do because your stepmom is so hot? That you're going to refrain because if you do it, you might bring catastrophe on everybody else. That's the mechanism that was noble according to Torah. Not that I'm a good person, whatever. It's that the community isn't going to suffer if I behave, if I stay in line. That was nobility. That was the goodest of the good. Was I care about Klal Yisrael, the community of Israel. And therefore, I'm going to watch what I do so that I don't, negatively impact the destiny of my people.
Having just read these verses, and from our vantage point, knowing what's coming down the road in several hundred years and then 1,000 years after this, what possible response would you make to sort of like a normative Orthodox interpretation that in terms of the Babylonian exile, the destruction of the temple, things like that they had it come?
So what I do is gently argue with fundamentalism and this theology. And I just can speak for myself. I can't obviously speak to someone else about what their experience is, but I can say that's simply not my theology.
But when you say that's not my theology, are you saying that that you sort of don't accept a kind of cause and effect God, essentially?
I'm saying I don't believe that this was written by God.
Okay.
Because that's what they point to, but it says in Torah. So your theology is not from Torah, it's something else. And I'm like, no, I don't believe the Torah was authored by God. I believe it was authored by people who believed if they didn't do X and did do Y, that catastrophe was going to befall them, because that's how they understood the crazy, chaotic universe that they lived in. And I completely understand that. I do believe in a cause and effect. Big time, right? That your skies will be copper and your land will be iron. That's what's going to happen. Look at California. Right? So that it means there's no rain and the ground is so hard you can't plow it. Right? That is what we're creating right now, right here, exactly what's printed in this text. And it's in our prayer book, right? So that's cause and effect. That I believe in 100%. And I believe that it's a moral and ethical obligation to refrain from behaviors that we really want to do. It's not about sex anymore, because that's all permitted, right? It's about driving my SUV or, and I include myself in that. But, driving what I want to drive, when I want to drive it, my convenience, my greed, my gluttony of resources is causing exactly what the Torah is talking about. And that's where, for me, there still is a theological and spiritual relationship between cause and effect. But it isn't about God. It's about us and our behavior. Stephen, you are looking at me like this in a way that I know you, and something's going on in there.
The only thing that dawns on me is that have we really come that far, because we're still pretty fear-driven and fear-motivated. So these, just doing good because we want to do good is not really enough.
We're human beings.
Yes.
This relates to the fact that this is how people are. We're human beings. We're fallible. Isn't that the whole story going back to Adam and Eve?
Just saying.
But theoretically, haven't we evolved a little bit?
Well, so Laura...
The package is different. The clothes are different.
Laura would argue that we have. Laura would argue that we're trying to be good people and evolved.
And not because, as you were saying, so that I feel good about myself, but so that the kids don't get malaria, so that the schools are better. So that was my point, was we try to do good things because we want the world to be better, not because we're afraid that if we don't, something bad's going to happen to me personally. It is about the community. If I don't act for the good of the community, this community will suffer.
So you're saying that positive motivation rather than a negative motivation.
Right.
I'm sure that's true for most people, though.
One of the words is ideally, it's absolutely right. We do things because we want to be good. Okay. But the real thing is there are consequences, and you raise kids to say there are consequences for doing certain things. And that word has to be in here, whether it's not extreme as this, maybe. And the best way to change behavior is reward, ideal, but if you want to change it, you punish. And sometimes it's called one trial learning.
There you go. Pam?
I was going to say that these curses seem sadistic, really. Like at 28:30, it could just say you're not going to find love, but instead you're going to pay the bride price. Essentially, you're going to find someone, love her enough, maybe to marry her, but you're not going to be able to be with her. You're going to build a house, but you can't live in it. They could have just said you're going to be homeless, but you're going to plow the field. You can't have you're going to raise an ox. You're not going to. It just seems extremely sadistic.
So remember, the positive on the other side was, if you've paid for a bride and haven't enjoyed her yet, you're exempt from going to war. If you've bought a house and haven't lived in it yet, you're exempt from going to war. So it's stated positively, and this is the other side. So in other words, it's not being made up here as a special intensification of curses. It was a formula that was around, right? That these were categories of, like, the worst thing you can imagine is that you've betrothed someone, now she's permitted to you, but another man is going to take her. Like, that's the worst thing I guess men could think about, right? So, or they own a home and don't get to occupy it. So it was stated both positively, and here it's stated in the negative, that thing that you're exempt from war because it's such a terrible thing is going to happen to you.
And I was going to say that, the curses, as we were talking about, we didn't read them all, but they do get more and more horrifying. Horrifying. And as Richard said, you can't help but think that this is Jewish experience. You know, even right up to modern times. I mean that, you know, maybe it's prophetic, or maybe it isn't, but it's hard. It's very hard, at least for me. I just go, all these things that really have befallen our people.
And it befell all the other neighboring peoples. That's the important thing to remember.
But it's like our long history of this.
But it is. It happens in Rwanda and in Congo right now. Right now. Worse than this is happening in Congo as we sit here in our air conditioning. So I know it's easy for us to focus on our own trauma, and I think we need to relate to our trauma, and we need to own it and experience it and name it. It's not unique.
I do think our experience is unique in the world. Yes, I mean how long we've been remained of people, and that this is anti-Semitism is a unique phenomenon.
So let me restate the case. I don't think the things that are talked about here are not unique to us having experience. We took these texts from other peoples. These are not ours. We took these from people who were afraid of the same thing because it happened to them, right? Disease, famine, rape, pillaging, all of it happened to everybody in the region. We were not unique in that experience. And my only point is, and we're not unique in having suffered these things and being afraid of these things. If you want to talk about anti-Semitism and how we've been picked on for centuries, fine. I don't think that's prophetic. This was written at a time where everyone else was writing the same stuff and doing the same ceremonies because they lived in the same circumstances. Anti-Semitism is something completely other and different that was not here. It did not exist in the biblical world, right? We were just like all the other people, struggling to make it and struggling to figure out how to prevent the terrible and increase the positive. That's all I meant, that we were not unique in the experiences of these things. That anti-Semitism became what it became and what that has meant for our people, 100%. And we could have this discussion another time because it's a really important discussion. I'm not trying to shelve it. I'm not sure, though, that I would say black people haven't had just as traumatic a history given racism. Are we going to compare suffering? Are we going to trump suffering? Are we going to, right? Like, why people with black skin? Why? Like, what? Why? And throughout history, when you deal with whites, why? And the whites have all the power, and whites get to decide what happens to black people. Like, what? Why? Right? Like, it makes as little sense to me as anti-Semitism does, and it's as horrible to the people who have experienced it for centuries, maybe millennia, right? And so, is there a unique hatred of Jews? Is anti-Semitism unique in its awfulness and its vicissitude? Okay, we could argue it is. I think I just always want to use my attachment to our suffering as a tool for empathy and compassion and a positive motivator to prevent it from happening to anyone else. Rather, I can't stay too long in why us and how horrible our history has been in comparison to everybody. Like, it's not helpful for me to stay there very long, but I think it's important to name it and claim it, because I think it's actually a big part of why we get crazy when we talk about Israel. People can't even have a civil conversation. I think it's because of exactly what you're talking about. The pain, the collective trauma comes out, the irrational response to that, which of course is irrational, right? Because it's about feeling, I think shows itself in our conversations about Israel. It's really about existential angst and PTSD that's activating all of the worst parts of our, the amygdala goes crazy and everything starts freaking out, and then we start screaming at each other like, you're a traitor, right? And so I think the pain is there, and I think it's important to name it and claim it, and then figure out what do we want to do with that.
Most of these curses are physical. The ones that to me always seem the most powerful are the psychological ones. And
okay.
It is amazing that this, you'll be confused. you won't be able to think right. Or the thing about children, it's not just...
Yeah, that's the one that, that's the one that
Well,
gets me.
To me, it is amazing that the psychological pain that these come from, and this is thousands of years old, is so relevant to us today, that we as human beings still can feel these same pains, although perhaps not some of the physical things here. The emotional...
Hemorrhoid ones, I gotta tell you, that's a terrifying one, Tari. That's a terrifying. That'll never go away, ever. Ever.
Hemorrhoids and mildew.
Because they experienced it, right? They experienced it.
Is the mildew the leprosy of the walls?
Well, so that is it mildew? Is it tzara'at? Only a priest can decide if it's mildew or tzara'at, but presumably they looked similar, right? But right. So let's look at the piece by Yael Splansky that you have, To Influence and to be Shaped by Another's Influence. So leaving the biblical world of the context that this comes from, this section became known in rabbinic literature and rabbinic circles as tochacha, as rebuke. So, and this was read in sotto voce in the synagogue. It was read quickly. Usually the shatz, the shaliach tzibur, not a congregant, was called to recite these and to do it. In other words, to take the ickiness upon themselves to read in a low voice very quickly all of the curses, right?
It's kind of the idea. This is going to read them out loud.
So it's so rabbinic. It's very rabbi, right? That we're going to take the Torah that had the whole national ceremony and big screens and, loudspeakers and everybody's, and the rabbis are like, sotto voce, very quickly, run through them, see if we can get through them as fast as possible. Okay, now we're done. Right? So it's...
God forbid you say...
God forbid you say... Right? So already there's an evolution from Torah time to rabbinic time about what you do with this. But tochacha becomes a concept in rabbinic literature because we do get in Leviticus 19... place you pulled one verse from, but you don't know this verse, right? So, let's put this on a sign too and carry it through the streets, Laura, okay? Hocheach tochiach et amitecha v'lo tisa alav chet. So you are commanded to reprove your kinsperson, but you may not incur guilt for having done so.
Can you translate that?
So you are required to give a tochacha. You are required to give a rebuke to someone close to you who's doing something that they should not be doing. But you may not do so in a way that now you're guilty of something. Right? So drop down. 2,000 years ago, you see that paragraph? I think, is it color copy for you? Okay, then you see the highlight, right? 2,000 years ago, the Mishnaic sage Rabbi Tarfon asked, I wonder whether there is anyone in this generation who accepts reproof. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah responded, I wonder if there is anyone in this generation who knows how to give reproof. Right? So they're arguing about what kind of a society they live in. I thought this was so appropriate to our time right now, pre-election. Together, these early rabbis acknowledge that criticism is hard to receive and hard to give so that it can be received. But according to the later Talmudic rabbis, the stakes are very high. It could be that everything depends on our ability to give and receive rebuke effectively. Such mutual responsibility for one another can make or break an entire civilization. Tractate Shabbat records the rabbinic debate. Why was Jerusalem destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE? So this goes, Pam, to some of your, right? The rabbis ask the same question, why? What happened? Why? Right? So Jerusalem, and Ula taught, Jerusalem was destroyed because its inhabitants were not ashamed of one another. And Rabbi Amram, son of Rabbi Shimon, son of Abba, taught in the name of his father's teacher, Rabbi Hanina, Jerusalem was destroyed because they did not rebuke one another. Effective critique of ethical lapses can keep a society, a congregation, a family from collapse. Drop down. However, the end of the next paragraph. However, our rabbis observe that when one citizen repeatedly dodges the obligation to reproach a fellow citizen, the fabric of society weakens and can begin to unravel. Drop down, skip a paragraph. Much is written about how to rebuke. so that it is more likely to be received. This is also how you don't incur guilt for giving someone rebuke. Rebuke should be given privately. So what is the way you would incur guilt here? To shame someone in front of other people was considered by the rabbis one of the worst things you could do. They said it was akin to murder. They call it halbanat panim, the whitening of the face. Because people just drain when they're ashamed. Their face drains of blood. You see people just go white as a sheet, right? That's halbanat panim, the whitening of the face. And they call it akin to murder. Because in a way, who you were before that, you can't ever be again. That it's that damaging to people and to their reputation, and you can't undo that. So who they were before, if, in fact, has been killed.
We still talk about saving face.
Right? That's exactly right. Saving, meaning saving the color of your face. Richard?
Isn't there a bit of a contradiction, though, in terms of what it's suggested that we do, in that in the paragraph it says, writing about how to give a rebuke, is that it should be done privately. But in the paragraph just above it, the issue is if we're seeing a woman scolding her child, too fiercely, that we should. It's how we respond then and there is important. Mm-hmm. Now, if you knew who the person actually is, because half the time you're seeing strangers in the supermarket, but if you know who the person is, I suppose in theory you should like.
So I think this is ideal. This is ideal.
In other words, do it privately if you
yes.
can.
You would know them. It's somebody you know. It's someone in your community, and you would pull them aside. Right. So this is the ideal. Like I'm sure there are times where you need to step in and do something where it's not private.
If you see this thing happening out in public.
But private can mean leaning in and quietly saying something to a person and not in the middle of the aisle. Hey, what are you doing?
Okay.
That came really naturally to you, I gotta say, really easily.
I'm working really hard on the not shaming.
On the not shaming part. All right, it should be done respectfully. From the Mishnah Torah, it should be done without shaming. We see this in the Babylonian Talmud, and always out of love. And his anthology on Jewish ethics, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin advises, if you find yourself looking forward to giving the criticism, it's not the right time to give the criticism. Your motives are not yet coming from the right place, and your words are unlikely to sound loving. But if the thought of what you need to do pains you and you wish you didn't have to do it, then proceed. Your motives are probably trustworthy, and this will come through. Right? So the minute you're like, I'm going to take care of it, right? Not a good time to be offering feedback, as we call it.
I think Laura should hold a class.
Wait.
Rebuke in a Jewish humanitarian.
There you go.
I don't think my children would agree with you. Share with
Somehow they don't single out parents and children or siblings in any of this. I mean, I remember thinking it was kind of cool to criticize one of my siblings.
Right, and that because that's not a tochacha you're supposed to give.
Right, exactly.
Right, that's one of the ones that's off limits because it felt too good.
If you look forward to it, it ain't good.
It ain't good. That's right. If you look forward to it, it ain't good.
Yeah.
That's right. So the middle of the next paragraph, Slichot arrives this Saturday night. The High Holy Day verses and melodies begin to play, tugging at our heartstrings and awakening our consciousness. One medieval piyut, Gehine Kachomer, we call upon God to shape us, to turn each of us into a masterpiece. Some of the metaphors are gentle. Shape us the way a potter molds a lump of clay. Guide us the way a helmsman turns the rudder. Some are harsh. Give us form the way a mason chisels at the stone. Thrust us into the fire the way a glacier does with glass. When we sing this prayer/poem, we ask for criticism and correction. We open ourselves up to God's influence. With slichot, we begin to remember that more than we want to be right, we want to be good. We acknowledge that we are still works in progress and that there is no such thing as a self-made person. Let these days stir in us our deepest desire that our life can yet become a work of art.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.